Hi, this is Heidi, and this is My Reading Life, here today to do my July wrap-up. I read 14 books total in July, which again was excellent for me. I think that being on BookTube is definitely making me up my game in terms of reading amounts, although I will say that generally I do read more in the summertime than I do other times of the year. But still, I think the past 2 months have been really great for me in terms of amount of reading that I've gotten done. So let's just get into it. Since there's 14, there's a lot here to go over. So of the 14 books that I read, 5 were audiobooks, 8 were paper books, and 1 was an ebook. So I'm gonna just go through all the digital stuff that I read first, just so I can show you on my iPad pictures of the covers. And the first one I'd like to tell you about is Gwendy's Button Box by Stephen King and Richard Chizmar. I think that's how you pronounce it. And I listened to this novella on audiobook. I thought it was really fun listen. It's about Gwendy, who's headed into high school and wants to change her image, so she's running to lose weight, and she encounters a strange man on her run who gives her a button box for her to keep safe. And the button box has special powers, and Gwendy must figure out what to do with the thing. And it follows Gwendy through the course of her adolescence and teenage years and what the button box actually brings to her life. And I love Stephen King, and I thought this was a great, fun read. The next thing I finished on audiobook was a nonfiction memoir, and it was called You'll Grow Out of It by Jessi Klein. And this one I really enjoyed. What sucked me into it was the very first essay, which was all about how it's fine for girls to be tomboys when they're young and dress like just in regular boy clothes, and nobody thinks too much about it. But when you get older and you still want to dress in what are traditionally boys' clothes, everybody has a big problem with it because it's not what girls traditionally wear. And I'm that way. I tend to like things that are more, quote, boyish versus more, quote, girlish, even now today in my adult life. And I understand the pressure that women are under to dress like in a feminine way. So that sucked me in, and I did enjoy the rest of this collection, although it had its hits and misses, as most of these things do, but I found it enjoyable to listen to on audio. The next thing that I consumed in digital was Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions by Edwin Abbott. This is a classic book that was first published in the late 1800s. It's a social satire where the main character is a square, and Square lives in a two-dimensional society, and the first part of the book is all about that society and the classes within that society and how that society functions. And then the second half of the book is where Square finds out that his two-dimensional world is not the only world that exists out there, and he learns about one-dimensional worlds and three-dimensional worlds, and it's all an allegory for learning about other cultures and understanding that what you experience is not the only thing that can be experienced in the world. And this book, I thought the first half, the social satire part, where Square's explaining how the social mores work in his world, just was really dry, and I found it hard going. And then the second half picked up a little bit, but overall I was not particularly enthralled with this one. The next audiobook that I finished in the month of July was one that I've been meaning to get to for a while, and I finally was able to get it through my library, and it's called All American Boys by Jason Reynolds and Brendan Keeley. This has won multiple awards. I believe the Creta King Award is one of the ones it's won, and it's written in alternating chapters where Rashad is a teenage black boy at this high school, and he gets accused of shoplifting and is beaten by a white police officer in a local convenience store. And his classmate Quinn, who is a white teenager, witnesses it, and then we follow along after that incident to how things fall out for each of the boys in the high school, in their society, in their town. Basically, will Quinn do the right thing and report what he has seen? Will Rashad be okay? Will he recover from the injuries he has sustained from the beating he received at the hands of the white police officer? This was a good story, but in some ways was a little heavy-handed with its messaging. So it's not as good of an example of its kind as I would say The Hate U Give, which I read earlier this year is. But it is still an enjoyable read, and I think has an important story to tell. The next audiobook that I completed was in a series that I've been just plowing through, China Rich Girlfriend by Kevin Kwan, book 2 in his trilogy about the ultra-rich Asians. And then I also went right on and completed Rich People Problems, which is the third and final book in the trilogy. And you know a trilogy is good when you finish it and you wish that there was going to be another book in the series. But from what I have read, evidently there is no plans for another book in that particular series, which is really a bummer because I really loved it. It's just, great fun. It's not anything, it's not high literature, but it's definitely interesting and fun to read. So if you're into that sort of thing, I would definitely recommend that you pick it up. Okay, so then moving on to the paper books that I finished this month. I read Persuader by Lee Child, which is a Jack Reacher novel. If you like thrillers, if you like over-the-top action adventures where the good guy always wins, you'll probably like these books. They're fun reads. Again, not high literature, but a good time. I also completed Dreaming in Cuban by Cristina Garcia. This literary fiction novel is about 3 generations of Cuban women. The grandmother, the matriarch of the family, we follow her story from when she's a teenager all the way through till she's in her, I think, 80s. And she is a huge supporter of Castro, and she loves Cuba, and she would never leave Cuba, whereas one of her daughters leaves Cuba and goes to America and is very anti-Castro. And then another daughter remains in Cuba and sort of dabbles in black magic. And then we follow down to the granddaughters, one of whom is in America but wants to come back to Cuba and wants to be with her grandmother, and is sort of at an age where she doesn't get along with her parents, and she's trying to figure out who she is. The imagery in this book was excellent. It was very evocative. It really tells of a place and a time, but I found that the stories, they're sort of were disjointed, and the moving between the different characters got confusing at times, and I wasn't really sure where the story was going. So for writing quality and imagery, I give this high marks. For actual plot and story, not so much. And then one of the best books that I read this month was one called The Handsworth Times by Sharon Dugal. This was one of the Mothbox books that I received earlier in the year. Mothbox is a subscription service run by Mercedes over at Mercy's Bookish Musings, and I will link the Mothbox website down below so that you can check that out. This book starts out in 1981 in Handsworth, England, where riots are happening due to economic circumstances in that area. We're following this one family of Indian immigrants. The mother and father had immigrated to England from India some time ago, and their children are all British and being raised British, and it's the one of the sons in the family is killed right at the beginning of the book during the riots. and it's how the rest of the family deals with this tragedy, reacts to this tragedy. Can they come together as a family and survive this? How does the rest of the community and the culture impact what they're going through and either help or hurt them to get through it? I found the mother in this story particularly compelling as a character. There's 3 daughters and another son and the dad. The dad seems to fall apart the most, and the mom really shines as a character, and this was an excellent book. I can't recommend it highly enough. The best book I read in July is The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell. This is a fiction novel that has elements of sci-fi and fantasy in it. It starts in 1984, where our main character, Holly Sykes, has an argument with her mom and runs away from home. And what happens in that first weekend where she's run away from home will reverberate down through the rest of the years of her life. And we sort of follow along. The story is written in sections, and so every decade we get a new section basically, and some of the sections are from Holly's point of view and some of the sections are from other characters who interact with Holly, and it's all about what happens in this first weekend when she runs away as a teenager, how that impacts everything else that happens along the way, and it's just fantastic. It's the supernatural elements create this puzzle that you're trying to solve. You're trying to figure out how all these pieces come together, how all these characters interact with how they intersect with each other, and what's going to happen to Holly in the end and Holly's family. Excellent book. I think David Mitchell is a superb writer. I really have loved everything that I've read by him so far. I would definitely recommend this to anybody who is not afraid of needing to take the time to figure out what's going on and to being a little confused in the beginning and trying to see how all the puzzle pieces fit together. That's what kind of book this is, and I really enjoyed it. The last few books here, I'm not going to go into too much detail because they're books that I finished during the Booktubeathon, and I have a whole nother video where I talk about all my feelings about these books, and so I will link that down below if you want to hear more about them. But during the last week of July, I finished Homegoing by Jassy. I really liked this one. I finished Dispatches from Syria, The Morning They Came for Us, Dispatches from Syria by Janine DiGiovanni, a nonfiction about the Syrian conflict and the regular people that have to live through all the horrible atrocities that are happening in Syria. And then 2 graphic novels, Miss Marvel Crushed Volume 3 and Miss Marvel Last Days Volume 4. And again, I will link my wrap-up from the Booktubeathon down below so that you can hear more about my thoughts on those books. So that's it. That's what I read in July. It was a very successful month. Here's hoping that August is equally as successful because I have a huge TBR pile and I would really like to get through some of them. Hope you all had a good reading month in July as well, and I will talk to you later.